I want to turn it over to two rock stars. Brad Smallwood, Dave Morgan, both members of the ARF Board of Directors. And I say rock stars, and Dave has the blue suede shoes on today to prove it as well. Dave is founder and CEO of Simulmedia, and has worked in the online marketing space for many years, and actually began as a lawyer, and has a degree from Penn State and the Dickinson School of Law. Brad, well, I don't know if I need to give Brad an introduction here, but Brad is VP of Measurements and Insight here at Facebook with a global team of more than 300. And I'm going to let them talk about the integration of Facebook and television.
Before we get started, I took a picture of Dave's shoes, so they're so cool. So I think everybody should take a look at them later. Go ahead.
Well, I put them on actually for Gail because the first time I met her, I was wearing blue suede shoes on a panel, so I knew that she liked them. So we're going to talk about cross-channel planning, and we're going to talk about some of the things that you saw in some broad strategic opportunities, taken to a little bit more of a tactical level. So this slide, I don't think that anybody in this room needs to have explained to them. Television, in spite of the fact it's actually sustained its audiences relatively well over the last 25 to 30 years, had continued growth until the last few years and is now in a plateau with a slight decline, has a significant fragmentation problem driven by not only the large shows but the small shows dropping year over year. And this is just sort of showing the difference of 60 Minutes in 1980 to Sunday Night Football in 2015. And to give it a little bit of another perspective or context, 70% of all of TV's ad viewing time, all of its inventory, now occurs on an episode with a national rating under 0.5. And how the way this has impacted the advertising business particularly was you couldn't really go wrong with any one of the few channels because every single one gave you massive amounts of reach. And so you didn't really have to think about how you synchronized them. You could sort of swap them in and out. And in today's world, high reach is quite possible because we have as much or more TV viewing than might have been available at times in the past. But each individual channel and spot reaches significantly fewer people. And so that if you don't do it with a significant amount of precision, you're going to have a lot of the crabgrass problem that we heard about earlier.
Okay, and so when we think about that, first of all, in the previous presentation, we're talking about this concept, and for those of you that at the event earlier this morning, this concept of choice is coming through. Actually, I'm going to grab the clicker.
Yeah,
I need the clicker. But this concept of choice for the consumer is kind of developing, and you saw that in when you're looking at TV and you're seeing the smaller and smaller shows. Well, part of that's driven by just there's a lot more channels, but that lot more channels has led to a lot more choice by the consumers. It also means that they have a tendency to change channels more, all of those kind of behaviors. That's exactly the same thing that we're seeing on digital, whether it be on Facebook or wherever. Now, what that means is that marketers, this concept of talking to channels doesn't make as much sense as it once did. It's really about talking to people, but that's actually always what marketers have wanted to do is talk to people. Now, media partners like companies like Facebook or broadcasters or whatever, like we and agencies are kind of the ways that they can talk to people. But what's really important is that measurement kind of sits in the middle of all of this and helps people actually do that well. Whether it be measuring who you're talking to or measuring about how you talk to them, how it actually leads to impact. But a lot of the measurement systems were actually not built to operate that way. They were built to measure the mass media that you saw kind of in the far left-hand side of television, and not designed to give you much more granular understanding of either who's watching or as you do these kind of much smaller targets, how is it leading to ROI. And so I don't know if people have seen this slide before, and this is just a small representation of the challenge that marketers have, is that as we think about siloed media planning, which is, I think, less and less marketers and agencies are operating completely in a siloed way, but there are still generally are many, many different silos that people are planning and buying. And that inherently leads to wastage because the people are not silos. People don't operate in silos, that they actually operate all of these different across all of these different channels and many, many more channels. I'm just using a representation here. And so when you plan and buy, you have to think about the concepts of people. You have to manage reach and frequency and ordering of creative and all of those kind of across all of the channels that people are going to end up consuming. I think you're next. We are trying to figure out exactly how we're going to go back and forth. You want to take it back?
So a year ago, Simulmedia and Facebook came together to match set-top box data from television viewing with the ad deliveries on Facebook, where we could match them. We could take what was otherwise seen in a broad way and take it down to a very granular, single-source basis. It actually grew out of a beer more than 5 years ago on a bus on our way to a dinner at a conference, I believe.
And more beers after.
Yes, yes. And when you talk about what we were looking at.
Right, and so the idea is just kind of measuring, matching up the various exposures that are happening across both panels. The match rate. Sorry, did you cover the match rate?
I did.
So we end up saying
350,000 match sample. We used a portion of our data.
And so that. Very large sample. I guess it would be small if you were to think about kind of the U.S. Facebook population. But when you look at a sample of 350,000, we end up having a very representative sample. And then the other thing that we're able to do with that is because we have a lot of other data on those Facebook panels, we can actually for any kind of discrepancies that exist within the panels, we can understand that and correct for it. Match rate of 40%, and then looking across, we've started with 5 campaigns, and then 2. Go ahead.
2. We looked at conversions.
Yeah, we particularly the tuning category, right? So this is you.
This is mine. So what were the emerging insights that we saw in looking at this? The first thing that we found out is when we looked at the data as to who was being reached on Facebook and who was being reached on TV, and we looked at all of the ad deliveries on TV, by the way, we saw a lot of high-value targets being missed in any one channel, and so looking at one of the silos alone was certain to miss a significant amount of the target. 2, there were very significant, and I'm going to show you the actual details, cross-frequency effects. There was a very significant difference. This kicker effect that you heard described earlier, we could isolate it at the individual household level, and it was very significant. Those reached on both TV and Facebook within this period of time, which was most of it was relatively concentrated, had a significant different conversion rate than those that were reached individually and not on the others, and that there was a significant opportunity to maximize the amount of total reach that exhibited this cross-frequency. So we could see, just looking at the results on these, an awful lot of techniques that could be implemented in future campaigns without having to sort of create any special kinds of products or be able to do that.
And so when we think about this, this is the ARF slide that we just saw. We weren't 100% sure if they were going to show it, but and the point here isn't to talk about how digital or Facebook or anything is amazing, but it's the idea of that. What we all know is that talking to people across many different platforms works better. Whether it be priming them or following up with them, making sure that creative is matched across different channels, like that's how you build a great campaign. And that we know that if you were to do that, that's going to lead to more success. Okay, so then the question becomes, well, how do you do that? As you plan and buy on campaigns, how do you do that better? We ran a study on Facebook that was talking about memory encoding and how memory encoding actually worked across multiple platforms, and saw very similar numbers where we saw an 18% increase as you were basically priming people prior to seeing television spots that it actually drove kind of their ability to take in messages better. Like, and so you look at that, like, that's how we have to be thinking about planning and buying. And like, we would have always wanted to do this. Many years ago, we would have always wanted to do this, but we didn't have the ability, like, even if we knew that this all worked, we couldn't plan and buy on a kind of people-based level. We can now actually do that. We can do that on TV, we can do that on digital, and we can actually start kind of bringing this together. And so the 60% or the 19% or the 20%, like, all of that is kind of within our reach now. We just actually have to start planning that way.
So you have to think about, if you're going to do new things, you have to also be willing to look at what you're not going to do. And so if you look at television and you look at the campaigns that we analyzed, and I believe this is 42 campaigns, I think. We looked at where was the incremental reach by day part, because certainly as people are time shifting and people are working different schedules, you can be paying prime time for a spot that's actually not viewed until 2 in the morning, because that's actually when the person is viewing it. And what you find out is that it is, the amount of unique reach that only exists by day part might surprise you. Daytime not only has a massive amount of availability of reach, but it actually has a significant amount of unique reach. And primetime audiences, which can cost 50% more than other audiences, and sometimes hundreds of a percent more, actually only represent 8% of unique reach in a monthly basis. And so when you shift to a people-based model, you have to evaluate things differently. And that doesn't mean that there aren't audiences and unique content that people will want to reach on prime time, but looking at that as the place that you have to start wouldn't be how you would build your schedule from a ground up on a people basis.
And so exactly this kind of same dynamic happens. This is a representation of the Facebook auction. I shouldn't say I don't know what the right word is. It is the Facebook auction. And so this represents how it is in the US. And what it's doing is taking the 100% of the users in the US, scoring each of them based on how clicky they are. Not how much they're going to click on an individual campaign, but how clicky they are. And then saying, on average, what is the average CPM of that individual? And what you see here is, like, if you were to take the bottom 50% of people and call them 1x, and then take the top 10%, that on average, the clickiest people, not the people clicking necessarily on an individual campaign, just they're naturally clicky people, they cost 5.5 times as much. Now, we know from all the research that we've all done that those non-clicky people, or those clicky people and the non-clicky people, are just as influenced by advertising. They're just as impacted by everything, but people are paying 5.5 times as much for them because they don't know how to measure them. They don't know how to actually understand the value from these, and so they're buying clicks. That's a similar thing to what we're seeing in television, of, like, everybody's buying that very high reach buy, but it's not actually delivering that incremental reach. And so, so figuring out how you can kind of bring your cost down by kind of better understanding where the actual incremental value is coming from.
This is yours.
This is me?
Yep.
Oh, this is me?
Yeah.
No, I think this is you.
Okay.
This is you.
Yes. So across the 5 campaigns, we looked at the average TV plan had an average frequency of 4.5 times per week. And once you look at across, and the top 25% of the TV viewers saw an ad an average of 7 times per week. And you can ask people, why this was and where the average was. If you de-average that even, you're going to find that actually of the half that got the most, it actually wasn't even the 7 times per week. You're looking at like 15 or 18 or 20. And to the point that you saw earlier, when you actually look at their conversions, you started to find that you have passed the diminishing returns, and you're actually looking at the diminishing effects, that you're actually starting to drive down conversion rates by doing that more. And the one reason that stands out to the point we saw before is that 50% of the media spend on these campaigns was going to primetime spots, which on an individual basis represented a significant amount of reach. But on an aggregate basis, almost always represented duplicated reach against the very same primetime viewers.
This one's mine.
This is yours.
Yes. So so now let's take kind of the same campaigns and think about, okay, well, what happens when you're running that campaign on Facebook? And because on digital you can control your frequency. First of all, there's kind of the on-target percentage is higher. What's interesting, as we were running these campaigns, although the you would say, well, why isn't the on-target percentage 100% on Facebook, or at least a lot closer to the Nielsen norms? It's because we actually didn't get the information from the advertisers because they weren't actually, they said, oh, well, here's what I want to buy. Here's what I want to buy in general, and they didn't tell us what their actual target demo was. They told us what they were going to buy on TV, and so we ended up targeting a bunch of people that they didn't actually want. And so that's an interesting kind of process improvement that can generally be made, of like communicating what you really want and then actually allowing digital to target that. So even within there, then you're able to get a reasonable high on target. But the most important part is that you're actually able to control that frequency, and you don't have to go way out kind of to the other end.
And you can do the same thing when you do people-based targeting on television. You can actually create essentially a virtual frequency cap. And so instead of going from where maybe half of the frequency was delivered beyond the point of maximum effectiveness and diminishing returns, you can take that down to small single digits. And once again, you can burst you can burst it quickly. You can get the effective frequency against the light TV viewers and the heavy TV viewers about the same. And then you give yourself the flexibility, if you need to maintain recency campaigns and burst in as you need during that time period, not waiting for the full month for that to come in.
Yeah, I mean, so the point here isn't that you can't use TV to do this. The point is you actually have to really plan focused on reach, and that doesn't always mean buying prime time on TV, and then starting to think about how do you actually plan across both of these together.
So I think this is where this slide and the next slide shows you some really, really critical opportunities here. We looked at this campaign, how it delivered against adults and how it delivered against, in this case, African Americans. It was an African American targeted product. And you saw very significant incremental reach delivered above television by Facebook. And we have, this is the overlap, this is the duplication, this is the unduplicated TV. And in the African American target, a very, very significantly large target, Facebook delivered a lot more African Americans uniquely than television was able to do in that time period. I mean, I think this was one of probably the surprises that we would have thought TV was going to be really efficient in delivering, and it wasn't. And if you go to the next one, this to me is the money slide, which if you really unpack it, there's an awful lot of information here. I'm going to try to highlight a couple things. We looked at the conversion rate for this campaign by channel, unduplicated TV, unduplicated Facebook, and then where it was duplicated, and we looked at it across frequency during the time of the campaign. The blue is Facebook alone, the green is TV alone, and the purple is where they received both at that frequency level. So there's a couple, and in this case, while it's not visible here, the unexposed conversion rate was 2.5%. So imagine that's like a dotted line that goes across here. So one of the things that stand out, there was a significant lift at the +1 reach, at the first frequency on both channels. Number 2, which probably Brad can't really say, doesn't want to say, they were about the same. And these was not all video units. This was a mix of Facebook units here. And so in this case, Facebook performed at a comparable level to TV virtually all of the way through, with TV slightly outperforming it. And number 3, after you had 1 times reach on TV or Facebook, without question, your next best impression went to the other channel. So you would, from here, rather than giving 1 more TV to get another 5 or 10% boost, or 1 more Facebook to get a 5 or 10% boost, you got more than the doubling effect if you went to the other channel in that time period. So it basically said is it took 5 to 6 TV frequency or 5 to 6 Facebook frequency to equal 1 Facebook plus 1 TV. And so the question is, when you isolate it, when it comes to Facebook and TV, 1 plus 1 equals 5 or 6. So the ability to actually optimize against this and think about this, and also you can't help but miss this, the 4th point, which is as you were doing it on a coordinated basis, it kept growing, which may have gotten more expensive because you're 8 times frequency, but if you're in a highly competed for category and delivering that kind of frequency anyway, being able to do it in a coordinated way, you're talking about 25% of exposed population actually converting to this product. Oh, this is me too.
Yeah.
So buying based on people can help your media. What would you do? How would you implement this? First, the only empirical way would be to look first at what your people base, on a people basis, what your delivery would be. It doesn't mean people versus content, but you would start with people. Audience-targeted campaigns can reach 20% more of a target than standard campaigns. And they have, on average, 73% lower cost per reach. And you would absolutely minimize excess frequency. The audience-targeted campaigns, on average, have 50% lower frequency compared to standard campaigns, on the average, because they're actually hitting them all within effective. And these strategies will help you reallocate impressions from excessive frequency to lower frequency levels and add unique. So in other words, you can redistribute the waste and drive much more effectiveness.
So in summary, look, it's about people-based planning. It's not about digital versus television. It's not about Facebook versus television. It's actually about planning and buying based on the people that are consuming the media. We know that there is, the ARF has proven it. We've all proven it with our individual research. There's research going back 30, 40 years that shows that cross-channel exposure drives better campaigns. So look at your media buy and think about how to actually plan across media. The other thing, and this is like my pet project that I would love to see people execute, is like, okay, well, what does that mean? Like, what does it mean to cross-channel buy? Like, that's not how people sell or whatever. So think about, as everybody goes into the upfront season at the beginning of next year, instead of saying, okay, well, what money do I move to one platform versus another? Once you're done with your TV buy, come talk to us. Come talk to both of us, and we'll figure out, let's figure out how to plan around your television buy. The internal word that we call it is the afterfronts. Is like, well, let's figure out. We know who we can actually do a very good job with all the rich data that's out there about who's likely going to be exposed to your television campaign. Well, let's figure out how we're going to either prime them prior to seeing it or follow up after they see those messages. And we know that we'll be able to actually get this kind of impact, and it's going to make actually both of the campaigns better. So that's it. Thank you very much. I don't know if we have time for Q&A, but
we do. We have we have a minute or two. Brett. So we've got mics. Are there any questions for Brad and Dave? They are going on the road with this show. They're going to give Key and Peele a run for their money. Jane.
Could you talk a little bit about how you created the overlap samples? So I know that not all the set-top box data is available at the household level, and just I don't know how much you can give details of that.
I'll give some basic parameters. We took a portion of the name and address matchable set-top box data that we have available to us at Simulmedia, a significant minority sample, and we executed a match of ad deliveries with Facebook, and the 350,000 households were the remaining post-matched panel. So you're looking at a very significant size there, and then there is obviously, as Brad mentioned, because there's an awful lot of data in addition to just, let's say subscriber level information we have, that you also can look at it and determine a certain amount of things as to how it's balanced. This was not presented to be a matched balance set for the purposes of measuring media as a standard, but but for us it was a purpose from a research standpoint to look at a very significant. You could see the panel up against 18 to 49s. It balanced out pretty well just even at that basic cut.
Great. Yes.
Just one quick follow-up there. How are you taking household level data and matching it to individual data? How's the TV's household data, right, and Facebook's individual?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously, we have within our capacity, and there are certain things with Facebook has within its capacity to be able to associate individuals with households.
we generally have a model where we can do a pretty good job of identifying what households people are in. I think it's pretty obvious how that model would work.
Well, these ads were actually attributed to the household, so these were rolled at the household level.
Yeah.
So this was a household presentation. So you can even imagine.
But the Facebook ads are delivered at the individual. So if
Right.
the 18 to 49s or the male 18 to 49s, those are delivered at the individual. Yes, it is true that the television ones are delivered at the household level.
Right. So one of the things when you can think about is, even what we've shown in this single source is now an average of that single source delivery, which means if you start parsing that against individual groups and individuals and leverage the precision of Facebook after your TV to complement your TV, there's a significant amount of probably lift just doing the Facebook ads smarter, knowing where the TV ads either are likely to hit or did hit.
Great. Okay. No, wait.
What, just one?
One more. Okay.
It's a quick one. I'm just curious because once you put this in place, how do you suggest this can be measured in terms of results using, the usual measures in terms of end result? Because, as you know, it's tough sometimes to convince and to show the ROI. So how do you do that?
So I should have said that on the last slide. Like the answer is, TAR or any kind of cross-platform measurement that exists in the world, but like, so TAR could easily measure any of this. So we're actually not saying that the answer would be, okay, trust Dave or Facebook to say, okay, well, here's exactly the incremental reach. You can actually run that through an independent entity like TAR.
Yeah, and I would even say on the conversion side, what we've seen is any media mix model or multi-touch point attribution that has any kind of sensitivity with the size of the kicker here and the size of the pop, is going to show up if the model's good, and we certainly, in our experience, are seeing that those things show up.
Great. Dave, Brad, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.